In this audio presentation, I'll be talking about how the enclosure movement, which started in the 1200s and lasted until the 1900s, and is still happening to different and varying cultures today, has transformed the landscape of the Cumbrian fells. Also, I will talk about the origins of the enclosure movement and the following social unrest, cultural change, and the motivations behind why it started and why it has continued. When looking at the Cumbrian countryside, one of the most distinctive features are the expansive dry stone walls, which climb the steep fells, and the numerous grazing animals within them. However, it has not been so orderly and tree-bare in history. In the past, there have been many laws to give people the necessities for life. For example, the 1217 Charter of the Forest allowed people to live within the forest on unenclosed land and to fell trees as they were needed. Some of these people did not have direct ownership over their land, only an ancestral history with it. However, still they could live without strict borders and provide what they needed. And many lords and ladies did own estates and allowed the common people to live in certain areas, but without much regulation and such refined borders. The common people farmed crops and looked after livestock and had secure access to water, which was uninhibited by access rights to restricted property. However, this changed as the textile industry began exponentially booming. The landlords of the common people realized that it was more lucrative to use their land for profits by farming wool than it was to allow the peasants to live freely, and so they started dismantling the laws which gave each person a right to common land. This gave way to the rise of the enclosure movement, in which the landlords began restricting access to the land using fences, stone walls and hedges. This dispossession of ancestral lands was incredibly violent, with the razing of villages and forced removal of people from their ancestral lands, and over the following centuries, there were many riots against this mass dispossession across the country. Some of the more notable ones were Jack Cade's rebellion in 1450 and Robert Kett's rebellion of 1549, where people would trespass and dismantle border fences and walls, and in 1607 the Midlands Revolt began, which culminated in the peasants taking arms against the landowners, where the common people lost 50 lives, ultimately losing, and as an example, the landowners publicly had them hung, drawn and quartered. The use of lands for profit was then further accelerated during the Tudor period by the dissolution of the monasteries under the reign of King Henry VIII. This was due to the fact that monasteries lost their land and wealthy lords and individuals would snatch it up and buy it as an investment to make money. And in the Cumbrian fells, this land was primarily used as grazing pastures for sheep and cattle. This was because it was hard to farm crops by hand on the steep fells, and so they concluded the optimal usage for the landscape was sheep farming and wool production. Forests were cleared much faster than the common individuals sustainably used to under the 1217 Charter of the Forest. This was to make space for grazing pastures of sheep, and because sheep love to eat the tender roots of grasses and the shoots of trees and shrubs, the forest never really had the opportunity to repopulate the landscape. Therefore, we have mountainous green expanses, which we see today. However, this is becoming an issue as historically the diverse vegetation held together and maintained the topsoil of the most mountainous areas, keeping the soil healthy and secure. In the past, the removal of the vast root systems slowly loosened the soil from the mountainside, but was never a serious issue. However, with the current environmental crisis, the topsoil is being eroded at a vastly accelerated rate, which may prove to make much of Cumbria's mountainous regions barren within the next 50 years. It's hypothesized that to maintain the landscape as it is, preventing sheep farming on the fells is the best way forwards, as it would promote new growth of trees, shrubs, which can help lock the land together, slowly replenishing topsoil and, more essential, decelerating erosion. However, looking at the past, we can see that dispossession of someone's agency over their land is actually highly damaging and deeply scarring to the culture, to the extent where we can see it today. Not to mention that we will have lost major amounts of food production within our growing population. The stark irony of repeating the damaging dispossession of the past to recreate the landscape beforehand is grating. But in this romanticised landscape, we cannot be sure of the extent people will wish to hold on to their appropriated lands and their ancestral lands. But what we can be sure is that the landscape will drastically change if the past is not reconciled and a collaborative future is not in our sights.